You're listening to Ghostumentary Scary Short Stories, original pieces updated throughout the week.
The footsteps. Bobby had lost count of the days. The cold, damp walls of the basement had become his only contact with the outside world, the only thing to assure him that he still existed. He'd felt his way around every inch of the place in pitch darkness, his fingers brushing over crumbling stone and wet, rotting wood. The air smelled of mildew and something else, something coppery and rank, a smell he had stopped trying to identify. At first, he'd laughed it off, thinking Tim and Greg would unlock the door any moment, bursting into fits of laughter at their prank. But hours turned into a suffocating eternity, and laughter had long since abandoned him. His throat was raw from calling their names, from shouting for help, but now he barely whispered. The spiders and bugs that crawled over him were the least of his fears. Every once in a while, he'd brush them off, the soft scurrying of their tiny legs making his skin crawl. But he dared not make too much noise. Not anymore, not with the footsteps upstairs. Those slow, deliberate thuds of someone. No, something walking above him. Heavy, purposeful. It had started maybe a day after he was locked down there. He couldn't remember anymore, but those footsteps, they never left. And now, he didn't believe his friends would come back. Bobby had tried to sleep, but each time he did, nightmares tore him from whatever shallow slumber he could find. In the darkness, time lost all meaning, and his mind spiraled into endless loops of fear and despair. He clung to memories of home, of sitting on the couch with his mom, dad, and little sister, watching TV, the soft warmth of normal life, a world so far from this hell. Then came the crying. At first, he thought he was imagining it, a soft, pathetic whimper that echoed down from above. It sounded like Tim, but the more he listened, the more distorted it became. The cry turned from familiar to something wrong, like a warped record of a child in pain. The crying would stop suddenly, replaced by that same thud of footsteps, louder, more insistent, before a crash would cut through the air and leave him in silence again. He was terrified of what had happened to his friends. What was up there? The thought clawed at his sanity, and he imagined things he couldn't see, things with twisted faces and long, bony fingers, shuffling through the house. He couldn't even move anymore. Couldn't summon the courage to try and find a way out. All he could do was wait and hope that someone, anyone, would save him. It was then that he heard the door, a loud creak, and suddenly light, a faint, pale beam of light, sliced through the darkness, not reaching where he cowered in the far corner. His heart slammed in his chest as he squinted toward the source, seeing only the shadow of a figure at the top of the stairs. It didn't come down. Instead, it tossed something into the basement with a wet thud. The door slammed shut, leaving him in darkness once more. Bobby froze, his breath catching in his throat. Slowly, he crawled toward the source of the noise, his fingers feeling their way along the cold floor until they brushed against the bag. It was large and heavy, slick with some kind of moisture. His heart pounded as he ran his hands over it, finding the outline of what could only be an arm. No, a hand. He recoiled in horror, his fingers trembling. It was one of his friends. Tim? Greg? The thought tore through his mind like a hurricane, threatening to destroy whatever fragile hope he had left. He wanted to cry, but he didn't dare. He couldn't let the footsteps upstairs hear him. He couldn't make a sound. He crawled around the bag and found the stairs. Slowly, agonizingly, he pulled himself up, one creaking step at a time. He reached the top, his hands brushing against the door. The handle twisted easily in his grip, and with a soft click, the door opened. Light. It blinded him after so long in the dark. But there was no time to adjust. He stepped through the door, his eyes watering as he scanned the hallway. There was no one there. No footsteps. No crying, just silence. His heart thudded in his chest. A deafening roar in his ears as he spotted the front door at the end of the hall. He moved quickly but quietly, each step feeling like an eternity. His muscles ached from days of being cramped in the basement, but adrenaline pushed him forward. Then he heard them, the footsteps. They came from the back of the house, heavy and fast. Gaining on him, he didn't look back. He couldn't. He didn't want to see whatever it was that had been walking above him. Instead, he sprinted for the front door, flinging it open and bursting outside. The sunlight hit him like a slap in the face, the warm air a stark contrast to the cold, damp basement. The crunch of dead leaves and branches beneath his feet mingled with the sound of more footsteps, right behind him now, chasing him, hunting him. Then, a bark. 2 dogs, their sharp barks echoing from somewhere up ahead. He screamed, but his voice was hoarse and broken, a garbled cry for help. He pushed himself harder, feeling the footsteps behind him growing closer, too close. His lungs burned as he heard his name, faint but clear, carried on the wind. "Bobby!" His father's voice. Relief crashed over him like a wave, and he opened his mouth to call out, to scream for his dad. But before the words could leave his throat, something struck him. A sharp, blinding pain exploded at the back of his skull, and he collapsed to the ground, face first into the dead leaves. The world spun as his vision dimmed, but he could still see them. 2 boots, old and battered, standing right in front of him. Dirt, rust, and something dark, blood, he realized, covered the worn leather. His mind screamed, but his body wouldn't move. Then came the thud, one final, brutal strike, and everything went black. Bobby never saw the light again.
Looking for more scary tales? Subscribe to our podcast and visit ghostumentary.com. Let us know what you think or share with us your scary tales. We might just make a new story from it.